Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When Thomas Wilkins moved to a quiet lakeside to escape the chaos of modern life, he never expected war would follow him, armed not with guns but with HOA bylaws, drones, and private enforcers. What began as peace turned into a battle for the one place he dared to call his own. I never planned on becoming the kind of man who talks to pine trees, but living by the lake had a way of making you appreciate anything that didn't talk back, demand compliance forms, or critique the color of your mailbox. My name is Thomas Wilkins, and 3 years ago I did something I never thought I'd pull off. I bought a small slice of land on the northern edge of Lake Merrow, a quiet, deep blue reservoir nestled between slow hills and pines that had been here long before any of us. It took me nearly a decade of freelancing in IT, living like a monk, and turning down every meaningless treat-yourself purchase people my age apparently lived for. I never cared much for clubs or bars or expensive sneakers. I liked quiet. Silence felt like a luxury, one I earned with every late-night bug fix and every client who thought just one small change wouldn't break the entire back end. The land wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I still remember the first day I stepped onto it. Patchy grass, crooked shoreline, a cluster of old stones half buried like forgotten bones. I stood there imagining a home, a simple one facing the lake so the morning sun would strike the water and bounce into my living room. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I just wanted a place where my head wasn't full of noise. And, maybe deep down, I wanted a place where my father couldn't loom over me like a storm cloud, reminding me that I wasn't built like him, that I wasn't forged for war, discipline, and rigid purpose. He was a soldier for more than 3 decades, a man who lived by a routine that would make a drill sergeant sweat. I loved him from a distance, geographical and emotional. The closer he got, the smaller I felt. And when I chose computers over the military, he never said he was disappointed, but the silence between us said more than words ever could. We drifted apart the way ice cracks on a thawing lake, slow, inevitable, final. I built the house myself. Not every nail, not every pipe. I hired help where I'd otherwise electrocute myself, but the blueprint was mine. I worked with my hands until the muscles in my arms burned, until I understood the difference between the numb tiredness of computer work and the honest exhaustion of building something real. The place ended up looking a bit modern, a bit rustic, like it couldn't decide who it wanted to be, which frankly suited me fine. The peace held until the first time a woman with a perfectly trimmed blonde bob walked across my property like she owned it. She introduced herself as Karen Montgomery, president of the Silver Cove Homeowners Association. On the opposite shore, barely visible through morning haze, sat their kingdom of beige houses arranged like toy bricks. I had nothing against HOA communities. They weren't my thing, but people had a right to choose their own cages. The important part was that my land was not part of their kingdom. Karen didn't seem to think so. She began her inspection as if I had invited her. "Your exterior paint reflects too much sunlight," she said, squinting dramatically at my siding, which wasn't bright enough to blind a mole. "It disrupts the uniform aesthetic of Silver Cove." I blinked at her. "I don't live in Silver Cove." She smiled a smile that felt like a tax audit. "Oh, I know. But from our private beach, your home is visible, and we maintain very strict visual standards." That was the first time I'd ever heard of an HOA trying to regulate light waves crossing a lake. A week later, I received a letter, not addressed to resident, but to my full name. Someone did their research. The letter had the same tone as a friendly ransom note. Repaint your shed in approved neutral tones. Remove your dark-colored bird feeder, predatory colors, apparently. And consider replacing your window trims because they might appear aggressive during peak sunset. Aggressive window trims. I couldn't make that up. I didn't want trouble. Never had. So instead of ignoring them like any sane person, I actually repainted the shed. Then I swapped the bird feeder for a bland one that looked like it resented existence. I even emailed them a photo as confirmation, a pathetic attempt at peace with people who didn't want peace, only control. But when the requests kept coming, little changes, then medium ones, then absurd ones, I felt something sour growing in my chest. Not anger, not yet. More like a quiet humiliation, the kind you swallow because making noise feels too exhausting. Every visit from Karen was the same. A polite smile sharpened into a blade, a list of demands wrapped in false concern, and that faint air of superiority that made me feel like a freshman being scolded by a professor in a class I never signed up for. I didn't tell my father any of this. He would have asked the question I feared most. Why are you letting them? And I wouldn't have an answer he respected. I just don't want conflict isn't a phrase that survives in the Wilkins family. Our ancestors fought in wars. I struggled to fight off unsolicited emails, so I made excuses, put my head down, and prayed the problem would evaporate. It didn't. Problems like Karen don't evaporate. They expand, absorbing weakness like oxygen. By late summer, I began to feel the tension before I even opened my front door in the mornings. Every day felt like waiting for a test I hadn't studied for. Yet I kept telling myself everything was fine, peaceful, calm, my dream. Back then, I didn't know that nothing attracts predators like the scent of someone desperately trying to avoid a fight, and I had no idea just how far Karen was willing to push. It started with siding, then it was the trim, then the tone of my porch lights. If it sounds insane, that's because it was, but at the time, it didn't feel that way. It felt like reality had slowly bent itself into a shape I didn't recognize, and I was the only one pretending it still looked normal. After Karen's initial visit and the flood of recommendations that followed, I tried to keep things civil. I responded to her emails with sentences that read like hostage letters, carefully worded, cautiously polite, always implying I was open to cooperation without ever admitting guilt. And the thing is, I think she knew exactly what I was doing. That I was trying to play nice to avoid conflict. She could smell it like blood in the water, and that's when she got bold. At first, the requests were framed as neighborhood suggestions, passed down from some committee that, as far as I knew, existed only in her head. Then she started showing up unannounced, standing at the edge of my gravel driveway with her little clipboard and her too white smile, telling me my wild grass was 3 inches too high or that my outdoor chairs disrupted the natural shoreline. Harmony. Once she brought a man with her, a tall guy with a Bluetooth headset and a contractor's tan who looked around my porch like he was assessing a crime scene. She didn't introduce him. They left a printout in my mailbox later that day titled Community Aesthetic Harmony Guidelines, revised for lake visibility. The entire HOA was across the lake. You had to squint to see my house from there. But according to Karen, guests and investors often enjoy a full lakefront view, and it's important that what they see reflects our brand. Our brand. I should have told her to take that brand and stick it where the HOA sun didn't shine, but instead, I told her I'd look into it. And I did. I looked into repainting the chairs. Then I repainted the damn chairs. I kept hoping that compliance would bring peace, like feeding a bear to get it to leave your campsite. But the bear kept coming back, and with every visit, it grew more entitled. One day it was aesthetics. The next, it was noise. Then came a letter claiming that my chimney emitted visible smoke inconsistent with HOA environmental values. I burned cedar logs from a local lumberyard. I hadn't even used the fireplace that week. It was like being gaslit by a corporate sorority. What made it worse was that no one, not a soul from that HOA, ever approached me directly except Karen. She was the tip of the spear. The rest were cowards hiding behind bylaws and communal interests. Sometimes I'd see silhouettes on the other side of the lake, people standing on their sterile little beach, arms crossed, staring. I tried to convince myself it was paranoia. It wasn't. One morning I noticed a drone buzzing near my roofline. I stood on the porch, blinking into the rising sun, and saw it hovering, tilting slightly as if taking footage. I shouted, waved it off, even threw a rock that didn't come close. It zipped away toward Silver Cove like a roach into a crack. That was the day I started keeping a log. Every visit, every letter, every weird car parked on the edge of my access road. I didn't even know who I was becoming. Paranoid, maybe. But I also started seeing the patterns. The pressure wasn't just Karen's little hobby. It was deliberate, coordinated. Someone in that HOA had too much time and too little conscience. I tried to talk to someone. I went into town and stopped by the municipal office to ask about jurisdictional boundaries. The clerk pulled up the digital parcel maps, squinted at the monitor, and confirmed what I already knew. My property was not and never had been within the HOA. I even printed the damn map and pinned it inside my kitchen cabinet for those moments when I needed reminding I wasn't losing my mind. One night, after ignoring yet another notice taped to my door, this one suggesting I remove my outdoor thermometer, I stood in the mirror brushing my teeth and muttered, "Next time, I'll say no." Then I laughed because I didn't believe it. Saying no had become some theoretical fantasy, a thing for people with thicker skin or fewer guilt reflexes. Not me. But Karen, she was evolving. The shift was subtle at first. She went from fake smiling to cold, from suggesting to insisting. One morning, she stood on my porch and said, "You're young. I know this must be overwhelming for someone without experience owning property. Maybe it's best if you let us help you manage it, just until you get your footing. Help me manage it." She said it like she was offering to walk my dog. I remember staring at her, blinking, trying to decide if I should scream or laugh. I did neither. I just nodded. She smiled. "See? You're learning." I hated how relieved I was when she left. I knew what my father would say if he ever heard this story. A man who can't defend his own property isn't ready to own it. That's the kind of phrase he liked, blunt and loaded like a bullet. And that was the problem. I wasn't ready to own it. Not in his eyes. Maybe not in mine either. Still, I tried to claw back some dignity. I changed the locks. I installed a cheap camera by the driveway and pointed it at the front gate. I didn't know what I was protecting myself from. Maybe just the idea that I had no control. I told myself I was being responsible, but the truth was, I was scared, and that's exactly what she wanted. It was a Tuesday morning when she crossed the line from absurd to dangerous. I was drinking coffee on the deck, watching the fog lift off the lake like slow smoke. The air smelled of pine and wet stone, and for a brief moment, it felt like things might be okay. The visits had stopped for almost a week. No notices. No weird cars idling near the tree line. I thought maybe, just maybe, Karen had moved on to harassing someone else's chimney. Then I heard the crunch of footsteps on the gravel. I turned and there she was, Karen, wearing a beige blazer, heels completely inappropriate for the terrain, and holding a thick manila folder under one arm like she was serving a summons. She didn't even wait for me to greet her. "Thomas," she said, brisk and breathless, "I need the house." I blinked. "What?" She gave me the look someone might reserve for a toddler who just shat on the carpet. I said, "I need this house for the weekend. We're hosting investors from 2 out-of-state development firms, and this location offers optimal shoreline presentation. The main lodge is being renovated, so this property is the best available option." I stared at her. "You want to borrow my house?" "Not borrow," she corrected. "Just relocate temporarily. It would only be for 3 days. We'll bring in staff to clean afterward. It's a win-win." I didn't respond. I couldn't. I actually opened my mouth twice and nothing came out either time. She took my silence as confusion and powered through like a freight train of psychosis. "You'll need to remove all personal effects and vacate by 2 p.m. today. That gives you about," she checked her Apple Watch, 3 hours and 15 minutes. I finally found my voice. "No." Her jaw tightened just a little. "Excuse me." "No. You're not using my house. This isn't a clubhouse or an Airbnb. I live here." Karen smiled, but it was the kind of smile people wear to court depositions. "Thomas, I'm trying to help you." "No, you're trying to use me, like you've been doing for months. But this is my house. I built it. I paid for the land. I own every inch of this place. You don't have any authority here." Her face shifted, not dramatically. Karen didn't scream or curse. She simply went cold, like someone turning off the lights behind her eyes. "You have 3 hours," she said. Then she turned and walked away. Not another word, not a glance. I stood there for a long time, holding my coffee until it went cold in my hand, trying to convince myself I had actually said no, that I hadn't caved, that maybe this time she'd actually back off. But that wasn't what haunted me the most. What really gnawed at me was the fact that I had completely forgotten something important. My father was coming to visit that day. I hadn't seen him in over a year. We'd barely talked, but 2 weeks ago, out of the blue, he'd called. "Thought I'd drive up. See what kind of fortress you've built," he said, his version of small talk. I told him it was fine, that I had a guest room, that things were peaceful. Now, standing in the same spot where I'd just refused to be evicted from my own house, I realized I hadn't even cleaned the damn place. There were dishes in the sink. The guest bed hadn't been made. I hadn't been mentally prepared to see him, let alone host him. I dropped the mug into the sink, turned the water on, and started scrubbing like the house was on fire. Not because I cared about the dishes, but because I needed something to focus on that didn't involve Karen's face. He was supposed to arrive in the afternoon. I had time, enough to vacuum, maybe organize the workshop, remove the worst signs of a man who lived alone and cooked the same 3 meals every week. I made the bed. I cleaned the bathroom. I swept the deck. I even put out a new welcome mat, one I had been saving for some reason I couldn't remember. Home is where you shut the world out, it said. I thought it was clever. By the time the clock hit 2, I'd forgotten about Karen entirely. I was nervously checking the oven timer, wondering if frozen lasagna was a terrible meal to serve a man who used to eat MREs on desert deployments. I was about to change my shirt when I heard the knock. Not a polite knock. Not someone standing on the porch. It was the kind of knock that doesn't ask. It announces. Then came the voices. "Sir, we need you to step outside." What? I walked into the living room and saw them through the glass. 3 men in matching uniforms, dark gray shirts tucked into black tactical pants, all wearing radios and earpieces like they were part of a low-budget SWAT team. One of them stepped forward and tried the door. I unlocked it and opened it halfway. "Can I help you?" The lead guy was in his late 30s, short buzz-cut, rigid stance. "You were informed this property needed to be cleared by now." "You're not police," I said, already regretting opening the door. "And you have no authority to be here." He smiled. "We're security. Contracted through the HOA." "Yeah, well, I'm not in the HOA." Another man stepped forward and reached for the door. I shoved it closed on instinct, but it was too late. The lead guy slammed his shoulder into it, sending me stumbling backward. My foot caught on the corner of the rug, and I hit the ground hard. One of them grabbed my arm, twisting it behind me, dragging me halfway across my own floor. I shouted. I kicked. I barely made contact with anyone. "You're trespassing," I yelled. "This is illegal. You can't just—" That's when I heard the car engine, then the tires crunching on gravel, then his voice. "What the hell is going on here?" They didn't hear him at first, or maybe they ignored it. But I saw the shadow fill the doorway, saw the man I hadn't looked in the eye for over 12 months, my father, 70 years old, tall, weathered, still carrying himself like a threat. The guy holding my arm barely had time to turn before my father's elbow met his temple. He collapsed like a sack of laundry. The second guy lunged, and my father sidestepped, swept his leg, and dropped him flat with a hard thud. The third one backed up, hand reaching for something at his belt, but my father didn't wait. He moved like muscle memory, closed the distance, yanked the radio from the guy's chest, and punched him square in the throat. Not hard enough to kill, just hard enough to end the conversation. All 3 were groaning on the floor, one of them coughing, another trying to crawl away. My father knelt beside me, checking my arm. "You good?" he asked, voice steady, cold. I nodded. "Yeah, I think." He stood up, pulled his phone from his pocket, and called 911. "This is Roy Wilkins. I need sheriff's deputies out at Lake Marrow, North Edge. 3 men just broke into my son's house and assaulted him. I've detained them." Pause. "Yes, I'm armed. No, I haven't discharged it. I'm former military. I know the law." He hung up and looked around the room, then down at the unconscious men. "Looks like you got yourself some company," he said dryly. I didn't laugh, but for the first time in months, I felt like I wasn't standing alone. The deputies arrived 15 minutes later. I don't know what I expected. Sirens, a rush of officers spilling out of cruisers with their hands hovering over holsters. But instead, 2 patrol cars pulled in slowly, almost cautiously, as if they weren't sure whether this was a break-in or a community theater rehearsal gone horribly wrong. The lead officer stepped out and looked around at the scene. 3 groaning men on my living room floor, a toppled lamp, my dad standing over them with his arms crossed like this was just another Tuesday. I was sitting on the couch, holding an ice pack against my shoulder and wondering if I'd just witnessed a felony or a therapy session. "Mr. Wilkins?" the deputy asked, glancing between me and my father. "That's me," my dad replied. The deputy blinked. "And the homeowner?" I raised my hand like a confused student. "Yeah, that's me. I live here." He gave a slow nod, clearly recalibrating the situation in his head. "You want to tell me what happened here?" I did. As calmly and clearly as I could, I told him about the months of pressure from the HOA, how Karen had tried to commandeer my house like it was a damn conference room, how these 3 broke in after I said no, and how they physically assaulted me. While I spoke, my father paced slowly behind the officers, occasionally pointing to scuff marks on the door or where the handle had been bent. He wasn't trying to help with the report. He was documenting, cataloging. The man might have retired from the military, but apparently the military had not retired from him. The officers separated the 3 intruders who were now sitting upright, looking less brave and more nauseous. One of them, a square-jawed guy with thinning blonde hair, kept muttering something about authorized security measures and temporary relocation enforcement. Temporary what? The officer asked. He held up a laminated card from his shirt pocket. We're with Civic Shield, private security contracted by Silver Cove HOA. Are you law enforcement? The deputy asked. No, but we're licensed for... Then you had no right to enter this property. The deputy cut him off. The buzz cut guy, the one who'd twisted my arm earlier, spoke up then. We were given explicit instructions by the HOA president. Said the house was scheduled for temporary occupation due to planned events. We had authority. My father barked a short, bitter laugh from across the room. Authority? You're standing in a house not under your jurisdiction, with your asses handed to you by a 70-year-old. You think that's what authority looks like? One of the officers raised a hand. Let's keep it civil. My dad leaned against the wall and crossed his arms. I'm being plenty civil. I didn't break their bones. I gave the officer a copy of my deed, the parcel map, and the correspondence I'd saved. I showed him the HOA boundary, clearly ending at the lake's edge, and the legal confirmation that my property was outside their reach. The officer called it in. 10 minutes later, dispatch confirmed. My land was not, and never had been, part of the HOA. The deputies cuffed all three of the intruders. You're being placed under arrest for unlawful entry, assault, and battery, one of them said. Wait, Buzzcut snapped. You can't. The officer didn't even look at him. You'll have a chance to explain everything to the judge. But this is a criminal matter now, not HOA policy. They were marched out one by one, and my father watched them like a hawk. He hadn't sat down once. When they were gone, the officer came back in and looked at me. You should consider filing a civil complaint. These guys don't just get to rough you up and walk away from it. I plan to, I said. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. He nodded. And I'd recommend a formal restraining order against the HOA, or at least their president. Yeah, I said. Her name's Karen Montgomery. He blinked. That Karen, Jesus. She's a piece of work. My dad looked over. You know her? The officer gave a vague shrug. Let's just say you're not the first homeowner to complain. I gave my statement, then signed the incident report. The officers left me with a case number and a card for the county prosecutor's office. After they drove off, the house was eerily quiet. My coffee was cold. The lasagna was still in the oven, burnt to a crisp. I sat on the floor for a while, staring at the spot where I'd been dragged, feeling like someone had pulled the pins out from under reality. My father, of course, didn't collapse into introspection. He started picking up the room. Your perimeter's weak, he said, folding the rug back into place. Too many soft entries. You've got sightlines from the lake, no camera coverage on the east side, and no warning systems. Easy target. I didn't think I needed a defense grid, I said. He glanced at me. Now you do. I didn't argue. He spent the next hour walking the property with me, not saying much. Occasionally pointing to things, where to install motion sensors, which windows needed better locks, what kind of gravel made for noisier foot traffic. At one point, I stopped him. You don't have to do this. He looked at me. You're my son. He didn't say it with warmth. He said it like a fact, like gravity, like something that didn't need elaboration. That night, we sat on the back deck. The air was cool, full of crickets, and the soft lap of lake water. My shoulder throbbed, but I didn't care. I had a beer in my hand, a blanket across my lap, and the man I'd spent my whole life trying to impress sitting beside me without judgment. He didn't lecture me, didn't ask why I hadn't fought back sooner. He just watched the lake. Civic Shield, he muttered finally. I've heard of them. What do you mean? They're scabs, outfit made up of washouts and ex-cops who can't hack real law enforcement anymore. Hired muscle for rich people with HOA power complexes. You think this was a one-time thing? He turned to look at me, and for the first time in a long while, his voice wasn't harsh. It was low, grim. No, son, this was a test run. The next morning started with pain, not the emotional kind, the very real, very physical ache of having been yanked across your own hardwood floor by three guys who probably got their combat training from reruns of Cops. My shoulder throbbed like a bad song on repeat, and there was a bruise forming down my ribs where one of them had pressed a knee into me. I winced as I got out of bed, and I could already hear my father in the kitchen, moving around like he owned the place, drawers opening, mugs clinking. By the time I limped out there, He had already brewed coffee and was slicing an apple with the kind of precision that made me wonder if he was actually capable of disarming a bomb using only kitchen utensils. "Sit," he said, not looking up. I sat. "Shoulder?" "Still attached." He nodded. "You got lucky." "I got manhandled and publicly humiliated. Not sure that qualifies as lucky." "You didn't end up in the hospital, and they didn't pull a weapon." "That's lucky." I stared into my mug, then took a long sip and asked the question that had been gnawing at the back of my brain all night. "Would you have shot them?" He didn't answer right away. He finished slicing the apple, set the knife down, and leaned against the counter. "If I had to," he said. "But I didn't. That's what matters." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was just heavy. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Mr. Wilkins," a female voice said, clipped and formal. "This is Detective Lena Carver, Cumberland County Sheriff's Office. I'm reaching out regarding the incident at your property yesterday." I straightened in my chair. "Yes, of course. We've reviewed the preliminary reports. There's something you need to know. One of the men arrested, Brett Coulter, is a former law enforcement officer, Portland PD. He was discharged 2 years ago following an internal investigation." "What kind of investigation?" "Excessive force. He was involved in a high-profile incident involving a minor. The department settled out of court, and he was let go quietly. No criminal charges stuck, but he lost his certification. And now he's working private security. For Civic Shield, yes. That's what I wanted to ask you about. Their involvement in this incident is concerning, not just for you. We've had a few complaints pop up recently, mostly homeowners dealing with aggressive HOA enforcement in neighborhoods where Civic Shield's on contract." I looked at my father. He was already watching me, reading my expression like a threat assessment chart. "What happens now?" I asked the detective. "We're opening an inquiry into Civic Shield. Their licensing paperwork is questionable, and the fact that they acted outside of any legal jurisdiction on private property with physical force. That's enough for us to dig deeper." "Good," I said. She paused. "One more thing. Karen Montgomery, do you know where she is?" "She hasn't shown her face since yesterday." "Why?" "She's not returning calls, not answering her door, and it turns out she doesn't actually live in Silver Cove full-time. We're tracking her down, but it looks like she might have skipped town." I hung up and stared at the wall for a long time. "Karen's gone," I finally said. My dad sipped his coffee. Cowards usually run first. The rest of the day blurred into paperwork and logistics. I met with a local attorney recommended by one of the sheriff's deputies who specialized in civil litigation and property rights. We filed a formal complaint with the county, then began preparing a civil suit against both Civic Shield and the HOA. Turns out I had more legal ground than I thought. Unlawful entry, assault, violation of property rights, emotional distress, property damage. The attorney was practically giddy. HOA cases don't usually carry this kind of heat. This one, it's going to blow up, especially with Coulter's record. I told him about the drone, the letters, the suggestions that escalated into demands, the folders, the unannounced inspections, the language in the emails that sounded professional but felt like psychological warfare. "Document all of it," he said. "Everything. Timeline, dates, names, recordings, if you have them." I had it all, every message, every printout. I'd been too afraid to say no, but I hadn't been dumb enough to delete anything. Back at home, my dad helped me catalog it. We turned the guest room into a war room. Maps, printouts, photos, labels. He looked more alive doing that than I'd seen him in years. "This is how you fight without a gun," he said, tacking a copy of the HOA's Aesthetic Harmony letter onto the corkboard. Later that evening, while organizing files, I got a text from an unknown number, just a screenshot. It was a headline. "Former police officer among arrested in Lake Marrow home invasion tied to private security firm under investigation." The news had picked it up. Below the headline, there was a photo of my house, with a caption identifying it as the site of a controversial HOA-led incursion. The photo looked peaceful, even idyllic. I wanted to punch the screen. "This is going public," I said out loud. My dad nodded. "Good. Let them feel the heat." I stood on the porch that night and looked out across the lake. The lights on the other side twinkled like a polite suburb trying to act innocent. I wasn't afraid anymore, but I was angry. The lawsuit moved faster than I expected. I thought it would be months of legal molasses, buried in red tape and obscure court motions. But once the sheriff's office formally referred the case to the district attorney, and once Civic Shield made the evening news, the whole thing lit up like dry brush under a blowtorch. First came the subpoenas. Karen's name was at the top of every document. Her signature was on the internal memos that Civic Shield had tried to keep hidden. One email stood out, sent to their regional director just 2 days before the break-in. The subject line, "Make sure the lake house is cleared. No excuses." That email was the bullet. Civic Shield's legal team scrambled to contain the fallout, but they were already bleeding. Turns out Karen had signed off on a half-dozen similar eviction directives in other neighborhoods where she'd been temporarily placed as an HOA consultant. She was running what the media started calling a personal fiefdom campaign, pressuring homeowners, coercing compliance, and using Civic Shield as her enforcers. The HOA board in Silver Cove tried to play dumb, of course. We weren't aware of the specifics. She acted independently. We were misled. But their treasurer had approved the payment to Civic Shield, and a contractor invoice showed that special enforcement protocols were billed at premium rates. Double the standard. And the reason: client-designated urgency and high-level guests. I read that aloud in my attorney's office and had to stop myself from throwing the folder across the room. High-level guests. She was ready to throw me out of my own house for a catered weekend retreat with real estate sharks. That's what it had been about all along. She didn't care about aesthetics. She cared about influence, money, optics, and I was just an inconvenient silhouette on the wrong side of the lake. But what none of them expected, what I didn't expect, was how public the whole thing would become. Local media picked up the story after the arrests. But then it hit a statewide feed, then the national ones. Homeowner attacked by HOA security, not a member of HOA. Private police or vigilantes. Civic Shield under investigation. Fleeing HOA president sought for questioning in unauthorized eviction attempt. Karen had vanished the day after the incident, packed up her Mercedes SUV, and drove out of state. She left behind a frozen bank account, a gutted townhouse, and one very scared HOA board. But the law wasn't far behind. The district attorney issued a bench warrant for obstruction, conspiracy to commit trespass, and reckless endangerment. They traced her credit card usage to a hotel in Nevada, then another in Utah. By the third week, U.S. Marshals found her staying at a rental home outside Boulder, Colorado, registered under a friend's name. She was extradited within 72 hours. The mugshot didn't show the signature Karen smile, just a hard, dry face, like someone who finally realized the rules had changed. My attorney called me the morning after her arrest. "She's agreed to a settlement," he said. Her personal assets are exposed. She tried to hide them, but the paper trail was sloppy. We've got her backed into a corner. How much? $560,000. Full liability for damages, emotional distress, punitive compensation, plus legal fees. I nearly dropped my phone. "She's paying that," he chuckled. "Her lawyers recommended it. Said going to trial would be a guaranteed slaughter." I sat down on my porch, shaking. Not from excitement, just from the sheer weight of it all. The storm was ending, but the debris was everywhere. I wasn't the only one affected either. Civic Shield folded within the month. Once internal emails leaked showing how many contracts they had with overreaching HOAs, the company hemorrhaged clients. Several executives were indicted for negligent hiring and operating without proper residential security licensing. The state legislature called for hearings. A bill was proposed, informally named Wilkins Law, aimed at tightening oversight on private security firms working under HOA authorization. It would require annual license renewals, limit enforcement authority, and ban any use of force without law enforcement presence. Reporters reached out. One even asked if I wanted to testify before the committee. I said no. I didn't want to become a symbol. I just wanted to sleep without checking my cameras 5 times a night. I wanted to take a walk down to the dock without wondering if some drone was filming me, but I said yes to one thing: a restraining order. Filed, processed, and confirmed. Karen Montgomery was legally barred from coming within 200 yards of me or my property. If she so much as drove past the lake, she'd be picked up again. The HOA. It disbanded 2 weeks after Karen's arrest. Turns out, when you yank the queen off the board, the pawns start pretending they were never part of the game. Several board members resigned quietly. The rest voted to dissolve. Silver Cove became a regular neighborhood. No more governing council, no more dues, no more Civic Shield goons waiting to rough up porch furniture. I thought it would feel like victory. Instead, it just felt quiet. One evening, I stood on my deck with my father, both of us sipping bourbon and watching the water go still as dusk fell. The house was silent. No buzzing drones, no emails, no demands. He glanced at me. "You did good," he said. I almost laughed. "You broke 3 men in my living room. I just stood there." "You said no," he replied, and he was right. I had. I didn't expect him to stay. My father, I mean. After the lawsuit settled, after the headlines faded, after the HOA disbanded and the bruises healed, I thought he'd pack his truck, mumble something about heading west, and disappear for another year or two. But he didn't. At first, he said he'd stick around a few days, make sure the smoke's cleared. Then it became, might as well fix that fence line. And before I realized it, a month had passed, and Roy Wilkins, stoic veteran, my personal childhood specter, had become a semi-permanent fixture in my daily life. He didn't talk much, but when he did, it was direct, efficient, like every sentence had passed through an internal military filter for brevity and impact. We built a new camera system around the property together. Wired motion sensors, new locks, reinforced entry points. He showed me how to layer gravel so it crunched loudest under boots, where to place floodlights, how to stack wood for both aesthetics and defense. One morning, while calibrating the angle of a driveway camera, he handed me a small box. "What's this?" I asked. He shrugged. "Boxing gloves, 16 ounce. You need to learn how to hit something that hits back." I looked at him, confused. "You want me to take boxing lessons?" He didn't answer, just nodded toward the basement where he'd already cleared a corner and hung a heavy bag. Of course he had. To my surprise, I didn't resist. There was something satisfying, primitive even, about learning to fight. Not just throwing a punch, but learning when not to throw one. Breathing, positioning, reading movement. We trained every morning. It was brutal at first. I felt like my muscles had declared mutiny, but over time the movements began to flow. Not graceful, not yet, but controlled. "You're still thinking too much," he'd say. The body doesn't wait for permission. There were days I wanted to quit, but I didn't. Something in me had shifted. The old version of me, the quiet, compliant one, had burned up somewhere between Karen's clipboard and Civic Shield's jackboot diplomacy. What remained was a man trying to rebuild from ash, one strike at a time. And strangely, my father started to soften. Not outwardly. He was still blunt, still carved from oak, but he started talking more, not about me, but about himself. His time overseas, men he'd served with, his regrets, how he never knew what to do with me when I was a kid because I didn't come out of the womb with a buzz cut and a burning need to follow orders. I didn't get it, he admitted one evening while we were cleaning rifles before a hunting trip. "You wanted quiet. I thought it meant weakness." I didn't say anything for a long time. Then, "It wasn't weakness. I just wanted peace." He nodded. Sometimes those are the same thing. We started doing more together, fishing on the lake in the early mornings, target shooting, fixing up the dock. We rebuilt the old tool shed into something functional, even added a small smokehouse out back. Every project became a kind of therapy, a way to say all the things we never knew how to say directly. But it wasn't just about bonding. He was preparing me. "You won't always have someone to fight for you," he said one morning, wrapping my wrists before training. "Next time someone puts their hands on you, I want them to regret it." Part of me thought that was extreme. Another part remembered how it felt to be pinned on my own floor, helpless. So I kept training. The scars from the lawsuit weren't just physical or financial, they were emotional. I found myself flinching at unexpected knocks, waking up at every unfamiliar sound. Even after the cameras, the reinforced doors, the legal orders, there was still a part of me waiting for another attack. But slowly, that edge dulled. Not because the danger was gone, but because I wasn't afraid of it anymore. One day, we were out on the lake, just the two of us, rods in hand, watching the mist roll in. He asked me, completely out of the blue, "Why this place? Why this house?" I thought about it. "Because it was mine," I said. "Every inch of it. I built it. I chose it. No one gave it to me. No one told me how to make it. I just wanted one place in the world where no one else got to decide what it was supposed to be." He nodded. "You picked a good one." The moment passed in silence. but it hung in the air between us like a flag finally planted in neutral ground. No judgment, no competition, just mutual recognition that we were two very different men, both scarred by the same world, trying to live in it the best way we knew how. Later that week, I took down the "Home is where you shut the world out" mat and replaced it with one that said, "No soliciting, no HOA, no exceptions." My dad laughed when he saw it. "You're learning," he said. The lake was quiet again. It had taken months, legal chaos, broken ribs, burned bridges, but eventually stillness returned, the kind I dreamed about when I first bought the land. No HOA letters, no clipboard inspections, no drone buzzing outside my window like some Orwellian mosquito. Just pine trees, clean water, and silence. But I had changed. It wasn't just that I'd installed a full perimeter security system or that I now knew how to slip a right hook around a jab. It wasn't even the $500,000 sitting in a separate account marked for repairs, upgrades, and, if my lawyer's optimism proved true, early retirement. It was the fact that I no longer apologized for existing. That voice inside me, the one that always asked, "Maybe you're overreacting, maybe you're making a fuss." It was gone. Or at least quieter. I'd seen what happened when you kept your head down, hoping bullies would just lose interest. They didn't. They escalated. Until someone made them stop. Karen Montgomery pled guilty to multiple charges. She gave a remorseful press statement that probably cost more to draft than my entire property's original value. A lapse in judgment, she called it. A misinterpretation of authority. The internet had a field day with that one. She was sentenced to house arrest, fined into oblivion, and barred from working with any HOA, real estate group, or security contractor for a decade. No one wanted her anymore, not the investors, not the board, not even Civic Shield, what was left of it, wanted to admit they'd ever known her. But they hadn't been the real enemy. The real enemy was the idea that compliance buys peace. That if you just bend a little more, if you repaint your shed, if you smile through your gritted teeth, everything will settle down. It doesn't. And it never will. You don't get peace by asking for it. You build it. You claim it. And when someone tries to take it, you fight, not with fists unless you have to, but with truth, with law, with every ounce of spine you can scrape together. And then you fight again if you have to. One morning, I got a knock on the door. It wasn't Karen, or lawyers, or security thugs. It was a kid. Couldn't have been more than 20, maybe a local college student doing a summer internship. She introduced herself as part of a community outreach program started after the HOA fallout, a post-HOA neighborhood alliance, trying to bring people together without the paperwork, without the power trips. She handed me a flyer for a community bonfire. "We just want neighbors to know each other again," she said. I almost turned her down out of habit, but then I remembered what my dad had said when he left the week before. Don't just build walls, build allies. So I took the flyer. Later that week, I went. It was awkward at first, people unsure how to act now that no one was handing out warnings for having the wrong flowers in their garden. But after a while, the beers came out, the fire crackled, and someone brought out a guitar. I stayed longer than I expected, and when someone asked me about that HOA thing, I didn't launch into a monologue. I just shrugged and said, "They picked the wrong house." That got a laugh. I still fish every morning, still work on the house. Still train, even if the heavy bag's getting softer by the week. And once a month, my dad drives in from the foothills. We grill steaks. We talk like people who were once strangers but found common ground in blood and bruises. Sometimes we even say we're proud of each other, not directly, of course. Usually it's something like, "Not bad for a civilian," or "You swing that axe better than last time." But I hear it. I feel it. This place, this house, it's not just land and lumber anymore. It's a line in the sand, and I'll never let anyone cross it again.